Hello everyone, this is Professor Anton Garcia Fernandez, and I would like to send this video especially to the students who are taking the lower division Spanish classes that I am teaching at the university. When I say lower division classes, I mean the first, second, and third semester classes of Spanish that I teach. And what I will try to do in this video is to answer the question that I have received many times throughout the semesters and throughout the years when it comes to the lower division classes of Spanish that I teach. And that question is, how do I study for the exams for this class? Well, that's what I'm going to be trying to address in this video. But before I do, let me tell you that there are very different reasons for studying Spanish here in the United States beyond the fact that it is a requirement for general education and beyond whatever grade you are going to get in the class. There are many other reasons to study Spanish. Maybe you are in this class because you are interested in Spanish. Maybe you are taking this class simply because it's a general education requirement to have a foreign language. But think about this. By learning Spanish or any other foreign language, you will be able to communicate with people with whom you would not be able to communicate if you didn't know that language. You can also, if you learn Spanish, travel to Spanish-speaking countries, and there are many of those in Europe and here in America. You can also, by learning Spanish, gain an exposure to other cultures. And I think that is an important thing, one of the things that you definitely want to do when you are in college. And finally, although these are just a few of the reasons why it would be a good idea to study Spanish or a foreign language. In the case of Spanish, you should be able, in many cases, to use Spanish as part of your profession. If you are going into the medical field or into law enforcement, if you're going to become a lawyer, if you're going to have a government-related type of job, knowing Spanish, being able to communicate in Spanish, definitely is a plus for those jobs in this country. So think about it, beyond the grade and also beyond the general education requirement, learning Spanish really is a good idea. And I'm not saying this just because I am a professor of Spanish or because I am teaching Spanish classes at the university. Now, if we talk about the exams, when you are enrolled in a first, second, third semester Spanish class, those are the lower division classes at the university. The exams always have 4 parts. There's listening, there's vocabulary, there's grammar, and there is also reading. The exams always have those 4 parts, those 4 components. And the exams are always based on the contents that we see in the class. This is why attendance and active participation are really important in a foreign language class. The exams, you will see, reflect what we work on in the class. I do not teach towards an exam, but I try to make the exam reflect what I teach. So the exams are based on the exercises that we do in class every day. So come to class, do the activities, and then keep the worksheets and use them in order to review for quizzes and in order to review for exams. You can also use the quizzes to review for the exams to understand in what areas you are having issues and try to address those issues before the exam. That is why I say that the quizzes, which actually are worth less as far as your final grade is concerned than the exams. The quizzes are there to help you track your progress as we get closer to exams. But this is very important to remember, especially if at some point you're going to be a teacher, or you're going to be a professor, or you're going to teach, and then you have to test your students. As much as you can, always try to make the exam reflect what you teach in the class. Do not teach towards the exam. Now, let's talk about the different parts of the exam and how to prepare, how to study for those. Starting with vocabulary. Now, unless you have photographic memory, it will not help to study simply lists of Spanish words with their English translations. That's just not very helpful unless, of course, you have a photographic memory. Instead, look at them in context. Look at the words in context. In the activities that we do, next to an image or a drawing as they appear in the book, if you use flashcards, make them yourself. Make the flashcards yourself, because then you are writing the word out yourself. And don't just write the Spanish word and then the English translation. Do a little drawing, use the word in a sentence, write the difficult words in a piece of scratch paper several times. If you find words that are difficult, if you have a piece of scratch paper next to you, just write those words that are harder several times, because that is going to help you become more aware of the spelling. And when it comes to expressions, like for example, me llamo, my name is, or tengo 19 años, I am 19 years old, try not to translate those expressions word by word into English, because in many cases that is not going to work. So think about that as you are preparing for the vocabulary part of the exam. Then we have the grammar part of the exam, and you will see that we spend a lot of time reviewing grammar points, especially because in Spanish this is difficult compared to English, especially verb conjugation. In the present, in the pretérito, in the imperfecto, in the future, in the conditional. It is very important when it comes to verb conjugation that you learn the endings of the different verb tenses. So study those endings, but then go back to the worksheets, go back to the exercises that we do, and see if you understand those exercises. Why are you using this form? Why are you using this ending instead of another one? Try to do those exercises again in a separate piece of paper. Verb conjugation, as I say, is very important. And in the case of the difference between pretérito and imperfecto, or the subjunctive and the indicative, it really is not enough to learn when to use one and when to use the other. It's not enough to learn when to use the pretérito and when to use the imperfecto, for example. You need to know the endings as well. You need to study the conjugation, because verb conjugation in Spanish is a lot more involved, a lot more difficult than it is in English. There are also cases when there really is not a direct correlation between English and Spanish, and therefore translation will not help when we're dealing with, for example, the differences between ser and estar, saber, conocer, y poder, for example, para and por. There is really not a direct correlation between English and Spanish in these cases, and in many other cases, and so that's not going to help. What you need to do is try to understand when each word or when each verb is used instead of translating. So go back and review not just the theory, but also the many exercises that we have done in class and for homework about these grammar points. Very important to keep those activities once you've done them and once we've gone over them in the class, because they'll help you review for the quizzes and for the exams. And when it comes to grammar, I understand that grammar is not easy in Spanish. If you thought Spanish grammar was easy, well, you will find that in many instances it is not. So ask any questions regarding grammar that you may have always before the exam. In class, I ask continuously, ¿Hay preguntas? ¿Tienen preguntas? Do you have any questions? Well, in those cases, raise your hand and ask the questions that you might have, or come talk to me in my office hours or after the class, and we can talk about any doubts or any questions that you might have, because again, grammar is tricky sometimes. It's not easy in Spanish or in English or in any other language, really. So we've talked about vocabulary and grammar. There's also listening exercises in the exam. So I understand that students are usually nervous about listening exercises, but in reality, you are doing listening exercises all the time. When you hear me and when you hear your colleagues, your classmates speak in the classroom. This is very important to think about. Listening is something that you necessarily do all the time in the classroom. And also, listening activities always draw on the vocabulary and the grammar structures that we are working with in the class. So if you know the vocabulary, if you know the grammar, you've already gone a long way towards getting the answer right already. So work on your vocabulary, work on the grammar, and you will be listening throughout the whole class session. In listening activities, you often have to decide between, for example, true or false. Sometimes it is multiple choice. Sometimes you have to provide some information based on what you hear. That's the kind of exercises that we do when it comes to listening. So first and foremost, you have to understand the sentences that are written on the page in front of you and understand what is required of you in the listening exercise. And prior to the start of the listening exercise, if you don't understand something, raise your hand and ask me. I'll be happy to help before it starts, not during, not after, but before it starts. That's first and foremost. And then second, you don't have to understand absolutely everything you hear in order to answer the questions correctly. There are some keywords that you should be listening for strategically. So don't get lost because you think you don't understand everything. You don't need to understand everything. You need to follow along and, of course, recognize certain keywords that are going to help you answer those questions. Sometimes students get worried because they think they don't understand everything, and that, in many cases, is totally fine. Now, if you don't understand anything, then we have an issue and we need to talk about it. Also, listening to Spanish outside of the classroom as much as you can is really very helpful. You may have friends who may speak Spanish. Maybe you know of music in Spanish, and there's plenty of that to go around here in the United States. There are radio stations in Spanish. There's television in Spanish. YouTube videos are often in Spanish, of course. And so all of that, getting your ear accustomed to Spanish by listening to the radio, watching YouTube videos, watching the TV, listening to music, that is really important, all of this will make your ears accustomed to the sound of Spanish, and you will recognize words even if you don't understand everything. If you're watching a YouTube video in Spanish, you may recognize some words and some phrases. Maybe you won't understand everything, but the visual aid will also help you understand. And of course, you know, there are videos that are more difficult than others, and there are some practice videos even on YouTube for beginners, for intermediate level Spanish students. And the bottom line is that as much listening experience as you get, as much listening as you can do outside of the classroom in Spanish, well, the more you can do it, the better your skills when it comes to listening are going to be. Finally, we have reading. Reading usually comes at the end of the exam, and you should think that you practice reading all the time when you're learning Spanish and when you're doing all kinds of activities and homework. Reading activities like the listening activities draw on vocabulary and grammar structures that we are working with in the class. The text is geared towards the kind of vocabulary and grammar that we are learning in the class. So in the exam, the reading exercise is usually a short text in Spanish and then some questions that you need to answer in Spanish based on the text that you read. And that is where you need to find the answers, in the text that you read, not elsewhere. Now, first and foremost, read the text carefully and more than once. Once may not be enough. Try to read the text more than once. All the information that you need is within the text. You can underline some of the key passages that help you understand and help you answer the questions if you want. It's no problem. You can underline those key passages in the text. So first and foremost, read the text and read it, if you can, more than once. Second, use the information to answer the questions, but try not to copy word by word what's in the text. Try not to copy verbatim what the text says. That may not always work. Understand what the question is asking, and then find the correct information from the text to answer the question with complete sentences. And that's the third important thing about a reading activity. Always answer the questions with complete sentences in Spanish. And remember that in any language, for a sentence to be complete, there has to be at least one verb. Sometimes students ask me, how can I practice reading? Well, the best thing is to try and read in Spanish outside of the class as much as you can. And this is fairly easy these days because there are online websites that can help you with this. If you're interested in reading more in Spanish to practice your reading skills, you can ask me about level appropriate books that I can recommend or websites that you can go to. The more you read in Spanish, the better reader you will become, and the better you'll do these reading activities. And yes, there is a connection between how much you read in English and how well you read, and also how well you will be able to read in other languages. So the bottom line is read in Spanish as much as you can outside of the class if you are interested in improving your reading skills in the foreign language. And that's basically what we do in the exams. That basically covers all the different sections in the exams, and hopefully the tips will be interesting and helpful to you. But finally, as I am about to close the video, remember no matter what your experience with Spanish in high school or prior to this class of Spanish is or was, Spanish is not an easy language to learn. You may think that it's an easy language to learn because we have it around us in the United States all the time. You can hear it pretty much everywhere. And you may be led to think that it's an easy language, but it really is not an easy language to learn. At least it's not easier than French. It's not easier necessarily than German. It requires work on your part if you want to learn it well and do a good job in the class. Spanish also in the United States is a useful language, very useful language to learn in our country. It will allow you to communicate with people, to read different types of texts, to travel. You'll be able to use it in your professional work. It's a skill that transcends, that goes beyond the grade and the classroom. So take any and every opportunity you can outside of the classroom to use and practice your Spanish. You go to a Mexican restaurant, for example, try to order the food in Spanish and see if they'll bring you what you ordered. See what happens. Try to use what you learn in the class outside of the class or outside of the classroom, because what you learn in the classroom transcends the classroom and you can actually use it to communicate in the real world. I sometimes joke that the classroom is not really the real world, but you can take that skill and use it in the real world in order to communicate with people in your daily life. I hope that these tips will be helpful, and I hope that you can use them, you can put them to good use as you prepare for the next quiz and for the next exam in any of the classes that I teach at the university or that my colleagues teach at the university. Specifically, because this is what this video is aimed at, the lower division Spanish classes, which are the first, second, and third semester classes of Spanish language. As always, thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for your attention. And it's my time to sign off now. I'm Professor Anton Garcia Fernandez. See you in class very soon.